Mission is a key. Listen deep, and we'll all find harmony.
From the Cheyenne River, I apologize.
Emetakapi, apetukle, chante washte nepechuzapi. Blessings and greetings to each and every one of you. World Peace and Prayer Day, honoring Sacred Sites Day. A day that is part of our 4 seasons. We have the spring, summer, fall, winter ceremonial days. On Uchimaka, we as a Turtle Island, we are the First Nations people, Indigenous people, and we have many prophecies among our people. And from the heart of Mother Earth, we say the heart of Mother Earth is Chasapa, the Black Hills of South Dakota. And everything that we do is from ceremony because of that's the way Wakantaga, the Great Spirit, has given us a way of life to honor. And at this time, we're faced with global challenges, global disasters. And we are people of the earth that have a message for the world. And we need to have a voice, listen to the elders, listen to the spirit of Mother Earth. I am the 19th generation keeper of the sacred Chanupa, the sacred bundle keeper for the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, Oyate, or known as the Great Sioux Nation. And in our traditional ways, we have our ceremonies from the time of the Great Spirit that in our first creation was Trunkan Oyate. Trunkan is Trun is birth, Ka is ancient. And that's the first spirit. It was red, was hot, was Iya, or we say the rock, the stone. The second spirit was Mane Wichoni. Mane Wichoni is water of life. When these two came together, it brought Wowaka, a sacred energy, and which created the earth mother. We call it grandmother earth. And we have our stories that ancient ones kept the knowledge, the sacred knowledge of our ancestors. So we respect all the sacred teachings of our relatives from the past that have gone into the spirit world. So we say, no, we know what's going on in the past. We know what's going on today. We know what's going to happen in the future. And today, man has gone too far because we're faced with global disasters. The white buffalo calf woman, you know, she's brought the sacred chanupa, the sacred pipe to our people over 2,000 years ago. And the story is that there was nothing good at the time, and our people, our Tioshpai, the camp, they said two warriors, two scouts, sitting on a hill overlooking the hills looking for buffalo. And from the clouds, it was low, came a woman, beautiful woman, black hair, buckskin dress, carrying a bundle, buffalo robe. She came and she told the people, there's two scouts, said, I know what you are both thinking. One of you have a good mind, and one of you, you want, I know what you want, and you come to me. So when he approached her, a cloud enveloped, got heavy. When the clouds lifted, he was in skeleton. And she told the other scout, go back to the people. Tomorrow, some people say it was in 4 days. She came, she was singing a song. She came down a hill to the camp, and the people prepared with sage, and she laid that bundle down. She said, this is sacred chanupa. The red stone is the blood of her people, the stem. And we put it together for peace and harmony. Through prayers, you shall live. And when she left, before she left, she told the people that the wopre, the laws of the pipe, the spiritual laws. And then she left, she stopped, and she rolled over and stood up as a young black buffalo, rolled up the hill, walked up the hill, rolled over and stood up as a red one, walked up the hill, rolled over and stood up as the yellow, a buckskin. And the last one, she stood up as the white buffalo calf, black nose, black eyes, black hooves, and went over the hill as a white buffalo calf. And the prophecy is that someday I shall return and stand upon the earth once again with black nose, black eyes, black hooves. And this, my relative, was born in 1994. And the prophecy, the story is that many white animals shall be born all over the world. 1996, we went to Matotipula, known as Devil's Tower, and we like to change that name back to Matotipula. There we gathered many nations, First Nations, our first World Peace and Prayer Day. We are at the crossroads, either be faced with a lot of chaos, global disasters, tears from our relatives' eyes. We're going to see earthquakes, volcanoes, big winds. We're going to see tears from our relatives' eyes. We're going to see no more honorable wars. It's going to be all about money. We're going to see false leaders, false prophets. Or we can unite spiritually, all nations, all faiths, one prayer. And that, my relatives, is the first World Peace and Prayer Day. Since then, we have traveled the world 28 years, and today we are here at this beautiful place, Rancheria, the keepers of the Western Door. And we have many good speakers from different nations, different territories that are going to speak with us because they're the voice, the concerns that they have in their homeland. We have people all over the world praying with us right now. All the past places that we have gone to, different countries, different nations, and it's getting more stronger because the direction that we are going is not good. And when there's always, like the old ones say, when something is good, the negative is just as strong. And we need to have a voice, listen to the elders, their message of peace and global unity, because we are depending on each and every one of you to be in good spirit with us, because the Great Spirit gave us a good mind, and we got to get up in the morning with a good mind. And today, there's so much abuse, there's so much negative energy that's happening. It's not good for the future of our children. And I'd like to say that much right now because we have a lot of speakers that we really honored. It's the highest honors to be with all the people that have a prayer and peace, because that's what our way of life. We're spiritual people, and we must maintain that peace and balance upon Mother Earth. Wachitu, mitakuye, oyasi.
Right. Thank you, Chief Arvol Looking Horse, for your presentation and introduction. Our next speaker is our community and tribal liaison. Her name is Morningstar Galley? Yeah, Morningstar Galley. A lot of her work comes from protecting her ancestral rivers called Pitt River. And I would like to introduce her up and talk more about her herself.
Sasulai, thank you so much. Chimisanwe, Morning Star Gali, Ilagatage Chi'i, Ma'ajumawi is Chi'i. My name is Morning Star Gali, and I am Ajumawi Band of Pit River. We are just about an hour and a half northeast of here, northeast of the Mount Shasta territories. I first want to say Sasulai, thank you to Redding Rancheria, to the 1-2 and Pit River families that are here and hosting the World Peace and Prayer Day for us. And so for the past 14 years now, I have served as the California Tribal and Community Liaison for the International Indian Treaty Council, and also wear a few different hats. I serve as director for an organization that we have called Indigenous Justice, and Indigenous Justice does a lot of work to support and advocate for tribal rights here throughout Northern California. Part of our efforts have been in protecting our sacred places of Satitla, the Sacred Medicine Lake Highlands, and that goes to Glass Mountain, that goes to Mount Shasta. It's one of our boundary areas. I just wanted to share a little bit, if the slide can be pulled up. So our Pit River tribe, it consists of what is known as the 100-mile square, which is 3.5 million acres of unceded ancestral territory here in northeastern California. Our tribe consists of the Ajumawi and Otsagewi peoples that sit at the base of the sacred mountains of Goose Lake and the Werner Mountains, to Mount Lassen, to Mount Shasta, to Medicine Lake, Glass Mountain. It includes the following bands of Madesi, Montgomery Creek, to Big Bend. It's Stadawi, that Louise Davis mentioned earlier, her band, of Goose Valley, Bernie Falls, Ilmawi, from Bald Mountain to Caton Valley, Ajumawi, that's my band, from Fall River Valley to Pittville, the Hamawi peoples of Madeline, north to the Werner Mountains, Kosiolekti, the Alturas area, Warner Peak to Cedar Peak, the Starawi for Canby, Hot Springs peoples, Otsagewi of the Castle, Hat Creek, and Rising River, Aporage of Black Butte, Eagle Lake, and Madeline Plains, Adwamsini, Big Valley peoples of Bieber, and then Huisidawi, that is Cedar Peak, north to Fandango Pass, and west. So our tribe spans what is now known as Shasta, Siskiyou, Modoc, and Lassen counties. If we could go to the next slide. So I just wanted to give a little background on California tribes and our tribal areas. We have 109 tribes, what are considered federally recognized tribes here in California. We have over 75 tribes that are considered NFR or non-federally recognized. So here we have over 200 tribes and one of the largest tribal populations of both within the inner city metropolitan areas that we see in the Los Angeles metropolitan area and in the Sacramento and San Francisco Bay Area. And so with that, you know, we want to recognize that it is an issue that becomes very political, that it is, you know, considered prime real estate within those territories. And so where the land is considered prime real estate, the tribes are not afforded federal recognition. And so still to this day, it is the US government that is telling us who is and who is not an Indian person, and determines that through blood quantum. And so that creates an issue here, you know, in terms of protection of our sacred places. I worked as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for my tribe, for Pit River Tribe. And, you know, we were within the 4-county region, you know, in advocating for the protection of our sacred places. There are a number of tribes within the area that are not afforded federal recognition, and so that creates challenges where they would go to us and say, you know, that it was on our behalf that we would have to advocate and we would have to share that information, that, you know, it was not appropriate for us to, you know, to advocate and to consult on behalf of other tribes areas. But we are, you know, put in that position where we're willing to step forward. We worked on a bill with the name change. It was called AB 52. Where just in the last 5 years, they wanted to change the definition of what is known as a Native American tribe here in California. And so here it says the largest concentration of those non-federally recognized tribes, the largest concentration of Native Americans in the continental US, and the state-recognized tribes of Winnemem, Wintu, and Ahashiman. We have 2 genocides that occurred, the genocide during the gold rush of our people and the genocide of the mission system of missionization. There are 18 unratified treaties, and so it was right here at Redding Rancheria that there was a treaty that was signed, and the treaties that were signed throughout California were never ratified. There was pressure through the US Congress to step them away in a drawer. And so the tribes here in California, you know, believed that for over 50 years that those treaty negotiations that they participated in were ratified. I shared a photo of Kintapush, Captain Jack, who is chief of the Modoc Indians, and he was forced to hide out in the lava beds. So if you go, you see the lava beds that are north of here and past our sacred area, our sacred place of Medicine Lake and Glass Mountain. And so those lava beds are sacred places as well, because it was a holdout where our Modoc and Pit River relatives were fighting out the US Cavalry. They were being starved out. They would have to hide and go and be able to find water. And so we follow that route. We have a number of ancestral runs and ancestral walks here within our territories. And so one of those runs is that every year they have an ancestral run that will happen at the end of July and beginning of August that goes from Mount Shasta, from Yaraku to Mount Lassen, and it's a 100-mile relay run that follows in that direction. We have a Return of the Ancestors run where our ancestors were force marched down to Round Valley to the Covelo Reservation. And so we bring our youth and our community together to run out of Covelo, and they used Yaraku, the sacred Mount Shasta, as their North Star, and they followed that route to be able to return home. We have the Modoc Ancestral Run that follows the route of being able to follow that path, those 85 miles that our relatives had to run in order to be able to find water to sustain themselves in that way. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show a map here so we know that this is all Indian land, but this shows the different tribes within the area, the pre-contact tribal territories throughout California. And so you'll see in the far northeast corner there where it says Ajumawi and Atsugewi, that is our tribal territory and areas that exist. Next slide, please. These are the California Indian cultural areas, the unratified treaty lands, and state of California county boundaries. And so we see the 58 counties throughout California, the areas where our treaties were not ratified. And so, you know, out of respect to Redding Rancheria, there were the families here. It shows, you know, with the three-day big time that they just hosted in recognition and in honor of their allottees. And so these are the posters that you'll see on the inside of the arbor here of those tribal peoples that made this area their home. And so these rancheria areas were considered, you know, and were homes that were tribal lands that were created for the the unratified treaties in the area. And so, California is very unique in that we have reservations, we have rancheria lands, and we have what are considered Indian colony areas. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show a photo here of Satitla, Obsidian Knife Lake, which is also known as Medicine Lake. Our stories that are told from time immemorial are that Creator bathed himself in this lake and left natural healing properties. Even within the English language, it says, they called it Medicine Lake. And so it says here, tucked in a remote corner of northeastern California, the Medicine Lake volcanic caldera and surrounding forest highlands form a unique, visually stunning landscape that has been revered by the region's indigenous peoples and used in their cultural and religious ceremonies for countless generations. And so we have annual gatherings that take place every July. It's generally the third week in July that our tribe hosts and our cultural leaders and tribal members all participate in ceremonies where we take our little ones out to the lake. I'll share that when I was probably 16 or 17, it was after my father passed away, and so this was one of the places that I was taken to, one of the sacred places, and the instructions that are given to go and bathe yourself in the lake, to go and let some of that go that you're holding on to and carrying onto, and so to come out of the lake and feel like a newborn baby being able to be cleansed within the sacred waters there. Next slide, please. So here's some of the information that our tribe has been in litigation and fighting. It was first through Calpine Corporation that it was Calpine was proposing a geothermal power plant here in California. We now have the 30 by 30, and we have these efforts of green energy production and green energy development. And so if you drive up 299, you'll see on our sacred ridges up there that there are wind turbine plants. And so where green energy development is being touted as a solution, we recognize it as a false solution. This is a false solution in terms of the greenwashing of our sacred places, that in the geothermal energy development, because it's a volcanic caldera, they wanted to extract the geothermal energy, and they were going to use methods such as strychnine in poisoning the lake, and building these 9-foot high power plants that would really cause that destruction of our sacred lake and sacred place of surrounding. There's obsidian that is there on Glass Mountain, and that is the obsidian that you'll see, if you go to the surrounding tribes in the area, that's where that obsidian is collected and it's traded for, and it comes directly from this area. And so we know as Indigenous peoples that, this isn't something that can be replicated, this isn't something that can be mitigated, that, this is the only place that we have where we're able to go and practice the ceremonies in that way. Next slide, please. This speaks to the cultural significance of the lake that I mentioned earlier, where, the Creator handed down, these are our stories where Creator Hewesius passed down, the sacred healing powers of this lake and left it as a place where I have, some relatives and some friends who had various skin ailments or, maybe rashes, and they would go and soak in the lake and, recognize that it helped to heal them, maybe from, years of discomfort that they were experiencing. Next slide. So the efforts as of now is that there has been a push for a national monument, and these are the TCP quick facts for the Sacred Medicine Lake Highlands. We've been working closely with the Mount Shasta Bioregional Ecology Center. We've been working with the environmental there's environmental lawyers through the through Stanford Environmental Center who have been supporting us over the past 20 years plus in terms of the protection of our sacred places, and especially with the Medicine Lake Highlands and the efforts now to create the National Historic Monument designation. Next slide. So here's some history in terms of the first contact with our tribes and European Americans when settlers arrived. It was 175 years ago now with the gold rush, when they came in very swiftly, when the U.S. cavalry came in, when gold rush pioneers came in, and it was an effort. They thought that they were coming to find gold and that, they were all going to get rich very quickly. And we still continue in terms of, having to navigate the ongoing effects. We call it the toxic legacy of the gold rush, where I mentioned my daughter, where she lives in Elam Pomo. The Clear Lake there is polluted. These lakes and streams are polluted from the mercury contamination, the billions and billions of tons of mercury that was used in the gold rush mining efforts, and has now settled in and become sedentary in our lakes and rivers. And so that has been that ongoing toxic legacy where there are very, very many environmental health effects and contamination that take place today. The settlers and miners that came in back 175 years ago, they very much experienced that, it was a lot of hard work in terms of the gold mining and gold panning, and that the majority of them, were not able to prosper from it as this American dream was being sold to them. And so there were bounties that were put on our heads as California Native peoples. It was over $2 million in bounties for men, women, and children to bring our scalps in. It's how the state of California was founded, was through the state-sponsored genocide of California Indian peoples. And so, what we share with our children, what we share with our communities, where 98% of us were killed off, where these massacres occurred of our California Native peoples. We say that the 2% of us that survived, we are walking miracles, letting our children know and, reinforcing that belief to them that, you are a miracle, in walking form, in all that our people survived and all that they tried to do to kill us off and massacre us. They did everything that they could, for us not to be here today. And here we are still practicing our cultural traditions, still learning to speak our language again, and still participating in our ancestral runs and walks in this way. I also want to share that there's a couple of events that are taking place today. There is the 500-mile spiritual run that is starting from my aunt and uncles in Ilmawi territory. It's a 4-day spiritual run. It's a relay run. And so at this time, they're walking through the town of Bernie, California for missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. We have a number of relatives that have gone missing or have been murdered on their tribal lands. And so just last week, we were in Yurok territories for the Federal Not Invisible Act Commission hearings, where we brought over 23 families forward to testify and share that here we are today. The federal government is still not upholding its federal trust responsibility. California is a public law 280 state, and so the counties have to enact that federal support. And oftentimes when you're in a very racist climate and very racially charged climate, they do not seek out that help. And so, it's been very challenging and devastating for those families who are seeking, for their loved ones to be found, for seeking for those loved ones to be able to put to rest in that way, and be able to continue on those ceremonies that they need to have in order to have that peace. So that walk is happening today, and I also wanted to share that Junsan Yosada Nizapan Mohoji, a Buddhist nun who has been involved with walking on Turtle Island and walking in support of Native peoples. She started her walk yesterday, her peace walk there in Bernie, and so she stayed with us last night. We sweat last night up at my aunt and uncle's, and she will be walking. She has about 15 walkers that came from Japan and all over the world, and so they're joining here with you. They'll be joining you at Elk Flat on Wednesday, and I believe camping out along the way. And so I just wanted to share that as this World Peace and Prayer Day effort is happening, it's the 500-mile run that will be ending in Coyote Valley in coastal Pomo territories on Friday, and then June Sun's Walk started yesterday, and that's a 4-day peace walk that will go until Wednesday. Next slide, please. This talks about the management issues identified and the activities allowed. And so again, the burden is on us, the onus is on us as Pit River peoples in terms of negotiations and consultations with the U.S. Forest Service, with the Bureau of Land Management. There are 2 park entities that we have to continue to negotiate with. And, you know, even in terms of the motorboat usage being on our sacred lake, you know, the levels now they'll rise because of all the snow, and, you know, they say that climate change doesn't exist, but we definitely recognize and know that within California and throughout, you know, the extreme weather conditions that we've experienced, the very heavy wildfire and, you know, very dry summers and falls, and to now we're experiencing, you know, this past winter, a lot of heavy snow, rain, and flooding. And so those levels will rise now, but last year the lake was extremely low, and they don't put any sort of, there's no proactive measures in terms of, you know, protecting the lake, and so they'll still allow motorboats on it and motorboat usage when the level is extremely low. And so you'll see almost an oil film on the lake by the end of, I was there in July for the traditional gathering, and then I went back during the Labor Day weekend just to, you know, kind of get away from these large crowds and be out there with my family for a couple of days. And so by September, there's like almost a film on the lake because there is no sort of, you know, efforts to, you know, to help to control the boat usage on there. And from the boats and the motorboats, you know, they leak oil, and, you know, if there's any sort of spills, you know, then that contamination goes into the most pristine waters. I'll also share that, you know, the water from the Medicine Lake Highlands, it flows into the Fall River, it flows into the Pit River flows into the Sacramento River that you may have crossed down here. It flows all the way into the San Francisco Bay Delta. And so with that, you know, it goes right out into the Pacific Ocean. So when we were addressing the contamination efforts, when we were fighting for the protection of our sacred lands and waters, we were saying, you know, this isn't just for us, this isn't just for Indian peoples, this is for all peoples that will be affected by this potential contamination of our waters. It's also, you know, a responsibility that PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electricity, has not upheld in terms of instilling fish ladders on our sacred Pit River. There were 6 to 7 dams. I think the 7th one wasn't built, but 6 dams that were placed on our Pit River, and the promise to instill fish ladders was never fulfilled. And so to this day, for over 80 plus years now, we have not had salmon in our rivers. We are a salmon people. Our tribal symbol for our flag is 3 salmon that are in one circle. So next slide, please. Next slide. I think there's a few more and we can wrap up here. We can share this presentation for anyone. Next slide, please. You can move towards the end if we talk about the So this was one of our, as a coalition to protect Medicine Lake, and so we arrived at Calpine and, showed up, and Calpine was actually moved out. They moved out to Texas when we showed up in San Jose in large numbers, and, showed up and served them with an eviction notice from our tribal chairwoman at that time. Next slide. And then I think there's maybe one or two more that we can go ahead and end with. And then I just wanted to share a photo of my little one out on the kayak out there this summer, and some of my nieces. I think that may be the last one, but just wanted to say, and then sacred Mount Shasta, Yaraku, Tolokoitu.com, all my relations.
Thank you so much, Morningstar, for sharing. Our next presenter is going to be streaming live from Zoom. His name is Steve Newcomb, and I believe it's also his wife, Shauna Newcomb, that is going to be presenting their presentation on something described as original free nations and people. So I hope you enjoy this Zoom.
Kishilamiyang, Kikayu Yam Mananingake, Mil Ungundawakan, Mili Ungundawakan, Wuli Nepali, Wuli Nepalina, Wanishi, Kishilamiyang. I want to extend my greetings to each and every one of you and say what an honor it is to be here with you. And I'm going to be presenting today, unfortunately, without my daughter, Shauna. She's traveling and wasn't able to log on. But in any case, I want to be really clear about the foundation of the system of domination that has been used against our nations and peoples for many centuries. And I want to start by setting a context, which is the original free and independent existence of our nations and peoples, extending back to the beginning of time through our oral histories and traditions, contrasted with that system of domination that was brought across the ocean by ship and imposed on everyone and everything. And all of the afflictions and torment and suffering, all the poisonings, the toxicity, the destruction of life, and our languages, cultures, and spiritual traditions, our sacred spiritual ways of life, all the damages that have been inflicted on our nations and peoples and across the planet are premised upon a claim of a right of domination against everyone and everything. And I do have a PowerPoint, so if the folks that are handling the technology are able to put that on, I could go through a few of these slides. Next one, please. So I wanted to dedicate this presentation to all of our elders and spiritual leaders and ceremonial leaders, our traditional healers who have managed to maintain our languages and spiritual traditions or ceremonial traditions, because without those, we don't have a vital part of our life energy and support that connects us to all the past generations and enables us to be beneficial toward our future generations. Next one, please. I've already set this context So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. So these are the traditional territories of original nations as they are mapped out here. And that gives you some sense of the configuration of this part of the continent prior to that system being brought over by ship. Next one, please. So this is representative of that original free existence of our nations and peoples, with our languages, cultures, and spiritual traditions intact, with our laws, our traditional laws and norms and mores and values. Next one, please. And so we have this understanding of our traditional economies, our traditional ways of sustaining ourselves based upon a worldview of being of benefit to one another and all living things, and having to sustain ourselves. So that original free way of life, sustained by the buffalo economy in this case. Next slide, please. And then this is the genocide that was committed against the Buffalo Nation by the domination system. And you see this mountain of skulls, there's skulls there. Next one, please. Now, by the way, that was my friend, George Tinker, an amazing theologian. So this is representative of the criminalization of our spiritual leaders. And this is Thomas Frosted, a medicine man from Standing Rock. So I'm saying here on this slide that they were criminalizing our ceremonies, our traditions, our spiritual traditions, the things that sustained us psychologically and spiritually. And then they waged war against our languages and spiritual traditions. Next one, please. Now, this is an image of Black Elk, the Oglala visionary medicine person. A good nation I will make live. This is the nation of the nation above has said. They have given me the power to make over, which is referring to our ability to maintain and sustain our own reality, that original free existence, which rejects the claim of right of domination. Next one, please. And this, of course, is a photograph of the Wounded Knee Massacre, that effort to destroy by using their domination system against us. Next, please. This is something that Black Elk said toward the end of his life. When I look back now from this high hill of my old age, I can still see the butchered women and children lying heaped and scattered all along the crooked gulch, as plain as when I saw them with eyes still young. And I can see that something else died there in the bloody mud and was buried in the blizzard. A people's dream died there. It was a beautiful dream. And that's from the book Black Elk Speaks by John Neihart. Next vision. Next slide, I apologize. And I, to whom so great a vision was given in my youth, you see me now, a pitiful old man who has done nothing, for the nation's hoop is broken and scattered. There is no center any longer, and the sacred tree is dead. So this is indicative of the sense of despair and trauma from that horrible period. And the aftermath of the Wounded Knee Massacre and all those things that happened, and the way in which children were torn away from loved ones and subjected to those institutions called boarding schools. The schools in quotes, of course. I just want to give a sense of that transition, because the next slide will start to move into a different kind of understanding and the need to maintain those traditions. Next slide, please. My horses, Francis, they are coming. My horses, neighing, they are coming. Prancing, they are coming. All over the universe they come. They will dance. May you behold them. A horse nation. They will dance. May you behold them. Next slide, please. And this is the Chief Bigfoot Memorial Ride in honor of Bigfoot and his people, his community, massacred at Wounded Knee. And this is my friend Virgil Killstraight, straight in the middle there. Arvol Looking Horse is in this photo as well. And notice all those riders behind, the strength, the unbelievable feat of endurance to ride 300 miles through blizzard conditions, and commitment to a wiping of the tears and for a mending of the sacred hoop. And that's what they set into motion all those years ago. Next slide, please. So when Virgil and I met in 1992, we began a campaign to call upon the Pope, at that time, John Paul II, to formally revoke the Inter Cetera Papal Bull of 1493. And we did this at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. I might have lost my audio, huh? Okay, perfect. I was hearing everything in my ears, so it tripped me up a bit. That's why I was stumbling on a number of words. I apologize for that. In any case, we began that effort in Chicago at the Parliament of the World's Religions. And now, 30 years later, we're looking, I'm looking back on it. Virgil passed to the spirit world in 2019. Unfortunately, I miss him dearly. And, but we accomplished a little something in an effort to challenge the claim of a right of domination against our nations and peoples. Next slide, please. Another photo of us there. I think that's about 2004 or something. And the first one, the other one is when we first began. So next slide, please. This is me presenting my book, Pagans in the Promised Land, to Pope Francis. And it was 523 years to the day from when the papal bull was first issued. There were a whole series of those documents issued back in the 15th century that called for the domination and subjugation of original nations and peoples. And I told Pope Francis, we are calling on you to formally revoke the Inter Cetera Papal Bull of May 4th, 1493, to lift the darkness that the Vatican placed on our peoples. And he said he would read the book. Next slide, please. This is my good friend, Joe De Gaudi, who was chairman at the Yakima Nation for many years. And he worked with his nation to assist them to understand the claim of a right of domination that is traced back to the Supreme Court ruling, Johnson versus McIntosh from 1823. This year is the 200-year mark from when that decision was first issued, written and issued by Chief Justice John Marshall. And the whole decision is about claiming a right of domination, which they call ultimate dominion in the decision. When you trace that language back, you'll see that it is claiming a right of domination. It goes to dominium, and political power grown from property was in effect domination, said William Brandon in an explanation of that. Next slide, please. This is an image of my friend Sharon Venn and I looking at two of the original papal bulls, or one underneath that one there. This was at the Archives of the Indies in Seville, Spain. Next slide, please. So on the back of one of those papal documents was a notation by the Royal Secretary, Ganaran y conquistaran de los Indios, or Indias, which is to win and to conquer the Indies, which goes with the language that was used in those Vatican documents. The first one that in the series that we generally point to is from 1452, the Dum Diversus, which says that the King of Portugal is to go to the western coast of Africa and to invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery and to take away all their possessions and property. In this particular year, 1493, Pope Alexander VI wrote language into one of the papal documents. There were 4 issued that year, and the Latin says, "Casu bactuali dominio temporali alicorum dominorum Christianorum constitute non assent," which means they're looking for lands that are not established under the domination, dominio, of any Christian dominators, dominorum Christianorum. And that is the foundation of the U.S. federal Indian law system. Justice Joseph Story, who was on the Supreme Court at the time of the Johnson ruling, cited to this papal document in his commentaries on the Constitution of the United States. And he made a direct connection between the so-called principle of discovery in the Johnson ruling and this document from 1493, the Inter Cetera papal bull. Next slide, please. And of course, this is some of the language that I already quoted, issued by Pope Nicholas V to King Alfonso of Portugal. Next one, please. Next one. Next one. Thank you. So on March 30th of this year, the Vatican has claimed to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. And we've been in conversation with Vatican officials for many years about the specific issue of domination and the claim of a right of domination, and what I have spoken to Vatican officials about regarding the theology of domination. That's what I've cited to them. I've called it that numerous times and through documentation and so forth. Not once do they mention the claim of a right of domination, or even the word domination, or even dominion, but specifically domination more concretely. And so they're sidestepping all of this, and they're making it seem as if they've really done something significant. But in actuality, it's all a sidestep until they start to speak to the domination publicly and forthrightly and globally to explain the horrific devastation that they unleashed on the planet all those centuries ago that continues to this very day. They will still be in denial. And so, next slide, please. Now, this is getting into the nature of the state and what is a state, and the testimony of the various scholars and people that have looked into this. They trace that whole idea of the state, meaning whether it's an individual state, such as South Dakota or California, Nevada, or whatever name it goes by, is a system of domination. Max Weber said, a state is a relation of men dominating men. If the state is to exist, the dominated must submit themselves to the authority claimed by the powers that be. And so this is represented by this particular slide, this insight and understanding. Next slide, please. It's more of the same. So what I'm explaining here is that the very foundation, the premise of everything that's been used and continues to be used against our nations and peoples goes back to this theme of claiming a right of domination. I always say a claim of a right because if I say the right of domination, it makes it seem as if I believe that there is such a right, and I don't believe that for one moment. Now, in 1830, just to kind of support what I'm saying here, and to make it more specific about the Old Testament of the Bible, and to explain how the United States has used a Christian biblical worldview against our nations and peoples, weaponizing that worldview. I have this quote from a document, a report from Congress, a congressional committee regarding the Indian Removal Act, and the from 1830. And the quote says, the foundations of the states which constitute this confederacy were laid by Christian and civilized nations who were instructed or misled as to the nature of their duties by the precepts and examples contained in the volume. Now, when they say the volume, they're referring to the Bible, a book, which they acknowledged as the basis of their religious rites and creeds, to go forth, to subdue, and replenish the earth, were received as divine commands or relied on as plausible pretexts to cover mercenary enterprises by the governments which gave the authority, and the adventurers who first discovered and took possession of the New World. Whether they were right or wrong in their construction, meaning their interpretation of the sacred text of the Bible, I put in brackets, or whether their conduct can in every respect be reconciled with their professed objects or not, it is certain that possession, actual or constructive, of the entire habitable portion of this continent was taken by the nations of Europe, divided out, and held originally by the right of discovery as between themselves, and by the rights of discovery and conquest as against the Aboriginal inhabitants. So when they use the word conquest there, that's simply a synonym for domination. So they're talking about the locating of places, geographical places that were not known to them previously. And because in their effort to locate those places, they have already formed the intention, consistent with the language from the papal bulls that I've mentioned, to establish domination where it does not yet exist. That's what is being explained here. And they're expressing it one of two ways, two different ways, and you could take your pick. You can say they were misled, or they use that as pretext, or whatever it would be. Nonetheless, the claim of a right of domination is still there. And so the way in which this plays out is that the idea to go forth and to subdue, meaning another word for domination, to subdue is to dominate, and replenish the earth and so forth. That is explaining Genesis 1:28 from the Bible. And that is the basis upon which the federal Indian law system has been established. Next slide, please. So In 1954, the Justice Department submitted a legal brief to the U.S. Supreme Court in the case Teton Indians versus the United States. And in that legal brief, next slide, please. Oh, back to that other one. Thank you. In that legal brief, they cited to Genesis 1:28 and the book of Psalms. And they expressed the idea that the Teton people should not be paid financial compensation for a taking of their timber because the Christian nations of Europe had acquired jurisdiction over the lands of heathens and infidels. So the use of the terminology heathens and infidels obviously is religious terminology. The word heathen is defined as a word of Christian origin. And so this is just another illustration of the fact that the United States government has used, and there's documentation that it has used and continues to use all of this framework that I'm explaining today, and the claim of a right of domination against our nations and peoples. So everywhere you look, everything that has happened to our peoples over centuries, all the efforts to destroy our languages, cultures, and spiritual traditions, as I mentioned previously, stems from this claim of a right of domination. And I think that it's crucial that we begin to learn the true nature of what that system is and the arguments that can be used against it. And there are three main arguments that I express. The number one argument being first in time, first in right. That certainly is not the people that came here by ship across the ocean and staked their claim on some shore at the mouth of some river, laying claim to everything all the way to the source of that river. And the next principle is void ab initio, nemo date quod non habet. Void when initiated. You cannot grant what you don't possess. The royal charters and the papal documents that were issued invalidly because they had no rightful jurisdiction all the way across an ocean. They had no rightful jurisdiction outside their own home territory or their own lands. And in fact, in the John Cabot Charter of 1496, the king instructs the Cabots to get unto us, quote unquote, the jurisdiction, jurisdictionem in Latin, and titulum dominium, the domination title, which means that's an admission they don't have it. So that supports what I'm saying with this Latin wording about void when initiated. You cannot grant what you don't possess. And then the last principle is anything that's wrong from the beginning can never be made right because it was wrong from its inception. And that was crafted by a Western Shoshone elder, Glenn Wasson. And that's such a brilliant point. So the wrongful system and the wrongful claim of a right of domination will never be valid. So these are some of the main points that I wanted to make today and give folks their support, encouragement, everyone tuning in today. And we have the opportunity to go again this August to the Parliament of World Religions, the first one having been in 1893, which was the 400-year mark of the Papal Bull of 1493, or the Papal Bulls, I should say, and to present again 30 years later and to be much more specific about this claim of a right of domination and what can be done about it. The first thing to do about it is just say no to domination. And when you think about the murdered and missing indigenous women for 5 centuries, more than 5 centuries, all the destruction of our lands and territories, the way in which they have continued to mine and devastate and enrich themselves, the way they continue to create toxins and toxicity for all life. It's truly staggering the extent to which their claim of right of domination is getting more intensified to the prospect of a totalitarian system across the planet. And if it isn't already a reality to such a great extent, which unfortunately it seems to be with the 24/7 surveillance of everyone and everything, the intensification of AI technology and so forth, the use of that for these purposes. So maybe I'll just leave it there. And thank you very much for allowing me at this time to spend with you. And there's so much more that could be said, but that gives a concise explanation of what we're up against. One issue.
Once again, that was Steve Newcomb. You could certainly Google his name. He's doing a lot of work out there and a lot of important work. And our next presenter comes from the Dene people. His name is Sean Mulford. He does a lot of legal and historical research, and his presentation is going to be on the San Francisco peaks. He's coming in via Zoom, and this is Sean Mulford, everyone.
Hello, can you hear me? I see something that says, okay, good, thank you. Sean Mulford, Unisha, Tutness on Ninchla, Mai Dash Gijni Bushes Chin, Tlash Chi that should Che, Totsoni that should another. My name is Sean Mulford, and thank you, Stephen, for your presentation. I think what you've brought to the discussion is just so important for every cause that is being discussed today, including the one I'll be talking about, which is the Dog Sleed, which is the they call so-called San Francisco peaks in the Southwest. And you know, just as Stephen is discussing the system of domination, you know, when we talk about sacred places, one of the other underlying themes that comes up is water. Water is central to our survival, our foundation, one of the four sacred elements of life. And so our discussion on the peaks involves water. You know, we're out of water as human beings. And as a result of that, we have gone to reclaimed wastewater. So we're reusing our sewage water, and we're using it on parks and golf courses, on you know, in a multitude of ways, including now the very first ski resort to use 100% reclaimed wastewater for snowmaking. Now, there are a number of problems with that we've identified. You know, as Stephen said, back 30 years ago, they brought this topic up of the papal bulls, and now coming up at this next world religion, they can be more specific in their discussion on it, you know, because they learned something over 30 years. You know, for us, we're the same way as Indigenous people. We knew it was wrong from the very beginning. Our medicine people did a ceremony with the water, and they said that all the bad stuff is still in that water. And we learned what that meant. So from our knowledge, we knew that was outside the natural order and also contained all of the bad stuff in the water. And what we've learned is reclaimed wastewater has what's termed viable but non-cultural bacteria, meaning that it won't culture, but it's still viable. So that's why you can ingest it. you cannot ingest it, is because it could, with your stomach bacteria replicating every 20 minutes, it could spark back a virus or bacteria back into being viable, because now you're the energy source for it. But also, what we found when the medicine people said all the bad stuff is still in it, is the nitrogen and the phosphorus that are still in that water in very high levels. And so the plants, our medicine plants on the mountain, are used to surviving in a very nutrient restricted zone in the alpine area. They don't need very many nutrients, and they've learned to survive that way. And so when you put reclaimed wastewater down on the mountain, you end up loading the nutrients up to 3 to 5 to 8,000 times what it normally would get. And so when this begins to accumulate over time, the accumulation of all of that, you begin to create an environment where the medicine plants, the native species, can no longer thrive in that nutrients dense environment, and the invasive and exotic species begin to take over the environment. And so now we're beginning to alter the ecosystem, and we alter the ecosystem at the soil level, and then the vegetation, and then the insects, and then up the chain. And so it begins to cause a variety of problems. But as Stephen was talking about earlier, is we have this system of domination of the federal agencies that feel they're the ones in charge, and that they have the right to make those decisions for us and for the environment. And so we can provide input into their system, and they can have listening sessions, but they will not, they cannot allow us to fulfill our responsibilities, our spiritual responsibilities to all creation. And so as a result of that, the environment begins to, become unhealthy. And so this system of domination, the system of how decisions are made needs to be changed. And we need, as Indigenous people, we really need to stand on our way of life and begin to, with our spiritual authority, begin to defend these areas in a manner that is a little bit more upfront. And when I go in front of the forestry, I let them know that we are the authority as Indigenous people. We're the authority on these lands, and they have to remember that. And when they do that, when we say that, then we can begin to speak for these things a little stronger. But also their policies, their procedures, and so forth. We cannot, we cannot continue to go and use those type of things because they don't work. They need to be abandoned. And the laws and all of these things that are in there, abusing the people and the earth, those laws, we really need to challenge those and to begin to not stand on their laws, but our own laws, the nature laws, the Creator's natural laws. And we need to come together, and we need to talk about these things in real ways, and how that can be done and how it should be done. The federal agencies now are looking for our knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, but they're trying to reinvent the wheel. Unfortunately, it doesn't need to be reinvented. As Indigenous people, we have our language, our prayer, our ceremonies, our way of life, and it already is what it is. It's a balanced, healthy system, and they're trying to reinvent that in their own way, and it's not going to work. But what they can do is give us the free, prior, and informed consent that right. And as I told the forestry, I said, you're not giving us anything that we already don't have. So maybe the way I should say it is they should acknowledge our right to free, prior, and informed consent. And when they do that, we can begin to say no to different things. And by us and having the ability to say no and also say yes, then we can begin to guide the process in a better manner than what's being done right now, which is we'll hear your input and we'll decide later in our own way. And unfortunately, their way is about economy and power. So we have a lot to talk about. There's a lot of things to discuss, and they're all tied together in these discussions. The historical context, how do we deal with these people that believe, as Stephen said in Genesis, that they have the right to not only subdue the earth, but to dominate all living things, subdue and dominate all living things. How do we engage a people when that's their spiritual belief foundation? Ours is about balance and harmony and living in good relationship with one another and the Creator's creation. Theirs is about domination and subduing. And so we have to realize that those laws are based on that. That's why I said we need to abandon that way of mindset of thinking. And we just have to stand on our way, which is on balance and harmony. And when we begin to do that, then we can start to get somewhere. But as long as we use their tools, it's going to be a destructive process. I'll just say that much. But again, thank you for everyone involved, and thank you, Stephen, for his work. He's working on a document for us, and I encourage all those that are working on their sacred sites to contact him, because we asked him as defending our holy mountain, we said we need to insert this information, this historical context that you've put out there and talk about. We need that specific to Dokosli, the sacred mountain. We need it specific to this issue. How did Mexico gain title from Spain? Spain gained title from the bulls and the European monarchs, and where did the Pope get his so-called authority to say, divide the earth in half, and it all goes back to that Bible and that Genesis statement and the so-called words of God, and I think that when we begin to look at that, we can really question it, well, what kind of God are you guys following here, and it doesn't correspond with what our way is. So we have to begin to look at those things, but it's good to have those exact rulings, the martial rulings, and to really have that detail in the sacred site defense, because that's what we're doing. We asked him to put something together specific for this issue, and then that way we can stand on our way of life. And when we begin to tell the forestry and everyone else, hey, you guys are just pretending to be in charge. You guys aren't standing on anything. And then they begin to look around and question themselves, well, what are we doing? And it comes back to their idea that might makes right. And that's all they're standing on. So anyway, I'll say that much. There's much more to discuss. And we ask that you come and put a prayer out for our sacred mountain, Dokosli, for the protection of that mountain, and that the reclaimed wastewater and any snowmaking of any type is not allowed on that mountain. And we'll put our prayers together and continue to follow it. And we will defend the sanctity of that mountain, and we will get to that place. There will be no. Thank you. Thank you.
Once again, Here we go. Once again, that was Sean Mulford from the Dene people. Our next presenter is named Bridget Van Baren. She's a chair from Living Peace Projects Foundation. She traveled across the ocean to come and speak to us about her project, Living Water for Living Peace. And so I'd like to introduce Bridget Van Baren up.
Thank you for introducing me. And I feel very privileged to be invited by Chief Arvol Looking Horse and by Paula to speak and to share my thoughts about peace and water. So special greetings of peace to all these guests and leaders present here. And it's a very special event and on a very special spot near Mount Shasta, where in 1989 His Holiness Taisito Rinpoche organized his first peace pilgrimage for active peace to Mount Shasta. And in line with this is also Chief Arvol's mission for all nations, all faiths, and one prayer. And with Living Peace Projects, actually we organized a number of peace pilgrimages to show and to present and to convey a message of an active form of peace. So not only praying for peace and spreading the word, that is very important, but also to show it, to present it. And to honor these words of peace and these blessings, I will now make a convocation in all the traditions which are related to Living Peace Projects. So I start 3 times. Om Shanti Shalom Salam Amen Hu Vai Guru Mini Vichoni Bodhi Svaha. Om Shanti Shalom Salam Amen Hu Vai Guru Mini Vichoni Bodhi Svaha. Om Shanti Shalom Salam Amen Hu Vai Guru Mini Vichoni Bodhi Svaha. Peace is a very difficult concept. When I meditate, I can bring myself at peace. But to extend this peaceful energy to humanity is quite a different thing. That's why I want to share with you the importance of living water. As living water is something quite different than we normally think it is when we drink water as a product which we buy in the supermarket. Living water for me is the water from pure natural resources, which has a healing, coherent molecule structure, a healing power. But the deeper meaning of water is sacred and is acknowledged by all religions, all spiritual traditions. Know the value and the power of water. Water has a memory. Water has consciousness. And somehow once we learned and we understood the message of water. And along the line, we forgot our connection with the water. We had a sort of sense organ that understood the language of water. So our relation with the water is disturbed. We rely more on the logic and the rational way life evolves. But actually, our life never evolves in a rational way. Never. And still we stick to the logic, the rational things. There's a fuzzy logic behind all things. That means there's a logic behind our logical mind. And water can be our teacher in this. There's a saying in the Chinese wisdom that a virtuous man is like water. And his mind is as calm and peaceful as water. And his heart is kind like the water that benefits all and doesn't discriminate, is available for everyone. So we not only lost our connection with the water, we lost our connection with the heart. The heart is actually the gate that brings us to the water. Because the heart has a wordless language. But we lost that wordless language. We are so rushed in our daily life and in our work that we lost the silent language of the heart. We are stuck in our heads. And as some shamans said, the greatest distance we have to bridge is not between Amsterdam and Mount Shasta, but from our head to our heart. That's the challenge. And how do we bridge that distance? Important is that we noticed that we are something quite different than what we think we are. We think we are a body with feelings and emotions, but we're only looking in the wrong direction. Actually, we are, in the first place, formless presence. And our body is just a shell. And if you lie our shell under a microscope, you will see it's as empty as the universe. So who are we? We are driven by our thoughts. We have created our thoughts and our emotions, and we think we are that. We are actually not only formless presence, we are energetic water beings. We are more water than anything else. So the water from our blue planet Earth is the heart for our blue planet Earth. And water forms the heart of who we are. So it is said, you know, without water there's no life. Without water, no peace. So how do we connect with the water inside and outside us? And how are we getting conscious that our thoughts and our emotions are related to the water? So if I have sad thoughts and I'm speaking with someone, my thoughts will, you know, be poured into the other person. Because water has the tendency to go beyond its boundaries. And our heart, has the tendency to go beyond its boundaries, to merge with others into the ocean of unifying bliss. So by caring for the water, and especially the purity of the water, and the living water sources, that brings us back to who we are. And that was also the start of our foundation. I was, connected with the water for the first time in 2013, where I was asked to organize World Water Day for the UN in the Netherlands. And I was asked, I was able to invite various spiritual leaders from different traditions to come to the UN Peace Palace. And out of this came a wonderful initiative for India, Jiva, Education and Sanitation, with the help of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and UNICEF, and we launched it half a year later. I believe in the spiritual leaders from all traditions. If they join hands, become friends and trust each other, and stand around the water, as is also the prophecy which has been shared by Chief Arvol Looking Horse, his grand ancestor that said, all the nations will stand around the tree of life, and the tree of life is water. So after 2013, I was asked in 2016 by an elder to become his successor, actually in Sufism, but I'm not a Sufi. So I asked him and said, of course, I'll convey the core message of Sufism, which brings all the spiritual leaders together. But the spiritual leaders from different traditions will never go and join a Sufi foundation. So are you prepared to give up your Sufi label? I'm a Zen teacher from origin, so I said, I'm prepared to give up my Zen label. And he said yes. So 4 months before he passed away, he was then 97. He was the former director of the IMF, Professor Witteveen. We founded Living Peace Projects Foundation. And a lot of spiritual leaders joined this foundation. We had, or still have, founding fathers from the Buddhist tradition, Hindu tradition, Sikh tradition, shaman tradition, rabbi, Hindu, Buddhist. So many traditions joined in this because they all joined on the themes and objective of water, peace, and education. And I hope that, I see, behind me is also the water and the water springs and the water sources. Because to make it visible and to make it tangible, I asked the spiritual leaders to write, first of all, an article on their sacred water source. And to my surprise, they all accepted my request. And we made a educational water springs book containing all the sacred water sources from 18 sacred water sources. And then I also asked them to collect the water from their sacred water source and bring it to the International Peace Palace in The Hague. And last year in June, they all video recorded, which you see behind me if it's correct, and brought their sacred water source into the International Peace Palace, and we merged exactly as the prophecy of Chief Arvol's ancestor said, the spiritual leaders of all nations stand together and merged the water. You cannot say afterwards, this is my water and this is your water when it's merged. It's one water to symbolize that we are one human family. And out of this, I designed a living water jewel, where these mixed and merged and blessed water sources has been merged in one. And if my vision is that living water brings peace into our hearts and into the world, and this water jewel, if the spiritual leaders, I also gave one to Chief Arvol and to Paula, but also to the other founding fathers, and asked them to wear it close to their heart. And I said, can you imagine when you wear this water jewel and your disciples and your friends wear this, we get all aligned on the same frequency. You first connect with the source of the water on your heart. And secondly, you connect with all those who around you who wear this water jewel, and building in that sense a heart community. So Living Peace projects and the work we are doing is to spread educational projects, tangible. And I forgot one important sacred water source, and that is rain. That is the sacred water from the heavens. And as most of the rivers are so polluted and so difficult to purify, rainwater is much more easier. So together with the engineers of the Dutch Water University in Delft, we developed an educational project for rain harvesting, solar panels, and sanitation as a backup to educate children about the preciousness of water, about the cycle of water, the cycle of sanitation, and the cycle of the sun. And so to conclude, for me, I don't know exactly if it's 15 minutes because I didn't look at my watch, because I'm speaking from the heart. And I'm following the flow of the water, which tends not to, to take care of boundaries. My vision is living water brings peace into our hearts and into the world. That is my dream and my hope and my wish for humanity. And with the friendship of the spiritual leaders and the collaboration of the spiritual leaders from all different traditions becoming friends, I think and I feel and I believe that this is possible, because water is the most innovative and most soft power, the most intelligent, wise power we have. And we are water. So when we purify ourselves with the water of the natural water resources, we restore our connection with water. We can restore our connection with the heart. And we can restore the connection with each other and with all living beings. Thank you for your attention. And thank you, Chief Arvol, for the opportunity to share this in this community. And as I said, I will support you with one prayer and all nations. I will bring you in contact with all the spiritual leaders connected with Living Peace Project. Thank you.
All right, that was Bridget Van Baren, everyone, with Living Peace Projects Foundation. Next on our list is a break for lunch. So we are going to go have some food and then come back at 1? Yeah, 1? Oh, yeah. Also, they will be broadcasting while we're on our break, so stay tuned.